Hello and welcome to the Road Monkey podcast, where we bring together some incredibly inspiring people, capturing their journeys, their wisdom and their reflections. My name is Kevin and I'm the host of the show. I've worked in sport and education now for more than 2 decades, and my aim for the podcast is to tap into the lived experiences of others to support you on your journey. Today's guest is Mark Covington, and he is the incredible founder of Snap Sponsorship. His purpose is to deliver more support for grassroots sports teams up and down the UK. And in our conversation, we discuss the absolute importance of sponsorship and the role it plays in grassroots sport. He also takes us through the journey of what it was like trying to build a sponsorship platform from scratch that is functional and user-friendly for the massive amount of volunteer-run clubs that exist. The conversation covers the onboarding process and how clubs can actually use the system, the actual impact that a sponsorship can have on the club, and how he balances the passion he has for both his personal interest in community sport and the professional sustainability of the business. We also touch on the importance of starting sponsorship initiatives early, and certainly with the Paris Olympics around the corner, the potential for increased participation in those sports during Olympic and World Cup years. So we're going to get straight into it with our 103rd episode and our conversation with founder and passionate sports advocate, Mark Covington. Hello, Mark. Welcome to the podcast. How are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely buzzing. It's been a long time in the making. I know I crossed paths a number of years ago, and actually I'm kind of really curious to get into this. But give us a little bit for our uninitiated listeners, a little bit of a background as to who you are and obviously your company's story.
Yeah, of course. My name is Mark Covington. Founded a company called Snap Sponsorship back in 2012. Ultimately, we exist to support brands in engaging with sport, again, predominantly in the grassroots space, although we do have some performance sport as well. Ultimately, supporting volunteers who don't necessarily know how, who, and where to go to find sponsors. And I think we all know that we live in that landscape where funding, income is absolutely pivotal to the enjoyment we can have, whether that's in a pool, on a pitch, in whatever sport we're playing and participating in. And there's just a huge lack of support. So we've just stepped in to sort of fill that void and help those volunteers know how to approach brands and how to deliver them value ultimately, so they spend more and stay longer. And that's kind of primary objective for us.
Fantastic. Well, I'm sure we'll dive into that a little bit deeper. And I'm thinking back unbelievably 4 years ago to our first interview we did with a guy who started a tech company off the back of being involved in sport. And that's now a global organization. So I'm curious for you, it's kind of your sporting background, because most people involved in sport, generally they either did it, they coached it, they helped out, they did something. So where was that for you?
Yeah, I think I'll probably fall into that category as well. It's all kind of organically built and grown out of my own experiences. So I was fortunate enough to be introduced to rugby at quite a young age. Absolutely fell in love with it. Had a great time growing up at my local club, which was Guildford Rugby. I went through my education and went off to Loughborough University. Obviously, you're stepping into an environment there where you are at the sharpest end of elite sport in that kind of academic environment. Had an amazing time being involved in the rugby club, ended up in the club captaincy role, which I was sort of incredibly proud to be able to do. And I sort of had my first taste of sponsorship, I suppose, there. As you can imagine, in that environment, there's actually brands that are fairly proactively approaching rather than you having to go out to market. But we did a deal with Green King, and I'm not going to suggest there was some sort of really well-polished commercial proposal from us. It was like, can we get some beer for the changing rooms? And obviously that was a pretty easy win for them, and certainly an easy win for us. When I sort of think about how that unfolded over time, actually there was a real commercial current from their side, which I suppose if I look back, I kind of understood, but probably not to the commercial depths that I would obviously interrogate it if I were looking at it now. But when I look back, Green King had a massive ambition around how do we get pumps into the university setting in an environment where people were drinking lager and cider, and they wanted to bring beer onto the pumps in the university. So by having us as the rugby team sponsored by Green King, it meant that I think it was 4 or 5 years later when one of the new facilities was built on campus, they ended up behind the bar. Now, obviously, there's a lot of work done by them to make that come to fruition. But that's how, I suppose, my first introduction to sponsorship, and there was some cash associated with it and other things they invested in, but obviously we were primarily motivated by beer in changing rooms. But that was kind of the start of the journey. And then I left university, went back home, went back to Guildford Rugby Club, and just kind of saw the same things happening there. So my local club was, like many, trying to improve facilities, improve experiences for the people that were participating. Ultimately, we've all seen clubs that grow, take on more members. You've then got bibs, balls, cones. You've got all the basic infrastructure stuff that a club needs to be able to enable people to participate. And we were probably $500,000 approximately short of the funding we needed for this pavilion project. And looking at our commercial strategy, it'd been driven by a super passionate volunteer with an amazing board. But the commercial strategy delivered probably 30 to 40,000 a year of commercial income. And it was like, how do we make a step change? How do we really drive an increased level of sponsorship in an environment where historically most of our sponsors were philanthropists and donors? They were parents of players. They were people that were associated with the club and had a real emotive buy-in. And I'd never want that to stop, because whilst I sort of pigeonhole them as donation and philanthropic gestures, yes, they stuck a logo on the front of the shirt on a pitch side board, but there wasn't a commercial driver, commercial current behind that investment. And what we did was we said, well, that's great, but let's put that to one side. And now let's think about, well, what is it that we have as a membership and how can we position that to potential sponsors moving forward? And I use this example all the time. And if people are listening to this and have ever spoken to me or heard me speak, they'll be bored to tears with this comment I'm about to make. But if you look at 99.9% of every organisation, sporting or otherwise, that has people that turn up to engage in one way or another, they're generally going to be a good percentage of those people that turn up that drive a car. And when I looked around my rugby club, I was like, we've got nearly 1,000 members, and very few of them are from the same family, and therefore there's 1,000 cars going through minimum every weekend. Now, when we consider that half of those families have probably got another car sat on the drive, it was a conservative estimate to say we probably had 2,000 cars associated with our club. And I looked around at our sponsorship portfolio and I was like, so where's the MOT garage? When I asked the question of the people at the club, it was just like this massive tumbleweed moment. And you can see that, everyone, the lights are going on in everyone's eyes. And you're like, of course, that's 2,000 MOTs at £56 or whatever it is per annum. That has to be done. It's the law. We don't have any wriggle room there. It has to be done. And then if we take a really conservative assumption that 15-20% of those cars are going to need some type of repair work, servicing or whatever else, and we apply an hourly rate to that times by the number of cars, our little club was actually worth a small fortune to a potential garage. Now, when you go and position that to half a dozen local garages that are within a 10-mile radius of the clubhouse location, it didn't take us long to pick up a new sponsor. And that same logic, and that's the logic which I speak to individual athletes, teams, clubs, leagues, national governing bodies on a daily basis, and just say, let's go back to basics. We have an audience within our club that buys products, services, experiences, and there are people out there that want to sell those products, services, and experiences to us. So why don't we just give the opportunity for that connection, that engagement, that trust to be built between two parties? And it makes both people's worlds turn around. So when you create an environment where you can get that level of win-win, those relationships will flourish. They will spend more, and they will stay longer, which is obviously what I started by saying today, which is the primary objective of what we've tried to achieve here at SMEC.
There's an interesting piece there, because if we look at the blend of, I guess, volunteer goodwill and then the more commercial side of things, London 2012, certainly in the domestic kind of UK market was a big gear change. I don't think we have and ever will see, or certainly in my lifetime, a thing on the commercial scale of that in terms of what was pumped into not just the sporting event itself, but all the surrounding projects that came along with the Olympics. And I think there is this, I guess, like perfect storm now where you're getting a lot more commercially minded people that are still actively involved through goodwill in their sports clubs or whatever organisation it is. And I think, like, I know through your experiences, you know, and having a look at like what went on at London 2012, I don't think it's a huge surprise that in the kind of 10, 11, 12 years that have followed London, you've seen the platform and the concept just grow and grow and grow, because there are more people thinking along those sorts of lines of going, how can we not just do a cake sale on a Sunday and hope that funds our rugby club, football club, swimming club, whatever it is?
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose I missed that point from kind of the journey. So leaving university, coming into the world of work, you know, after a few years, I ended up at the Olympic Park around 2010. So I started to see the venues grow out of the ground as the park was coming to fruition, and then seeing how sponsorship was being executed there, and just going back to some of those basic principles about, you know, know, like, and trust, and how do these brands become associated with the audiences they want to through the movement of the Olympics. And you know, 2012 was when we started the business. So, you know, I was doing the role as a volunteer at my club. I sort of stepped into the breach and said, you know, the cake sales, the family fun days, the bouncy castles probably weren't going to make up that £500,000 deficit we had for the build. And we needed that step change in terms of commerciality around how we're going to take our brand and our audience to the local market. And what I'd seen happen at the Olympic Park as 2012 broke, I was like, well, you know, these, whilst on a global, very grand scale, are really well thought through, very well funded activations that these sponsors are doing. Those same principles can be applied in my little rugby club down in Guildford. And I've just mentioned the word activations there, which, you know, most clubs have no appreciation for. And frankly, neither did I when I started the business, because I was like, it's industry terminology. It's like, well, what does that actually mean? And I go back to growing up as a kid, going to Twickenham and watching England play rugby. And I remember O2 walking around the perimeter of the pitch and using these big gas canisters to fire T-shirts into the crowd that, you know, you'd be fortunate to catch if you happen to be sat in the right seat. And those things stick with me. And it's those activations, you know, O2, you know, the T-shirt was no relevance. The one person wearing that T-shirt, if they put it on, was no relevance. It was the theatrics that they created around the brand. It wasn't just saying, hey, we sell phone contracts. It was more than that. It was trying to engage with the audience. And I think it's those principles that I saw at 2012 that we then applied in the club setting, that kind of hit off and saw us, you know, more than fourfold our commercial income in the first 12 months of me getting involved at the rugby club. Then when we kind of had that success, I was approached by someone at Guildford who sort of tapped me on the shoulder and said, well, why don't you go and do this as a business? Why aren't you? There's loads of clubs. I know other clubs within Guildford, you know, the cricket club, the rowing club, that have got the exact same challenge. They have aspirations to build new facilities or grow their audience, grow their membership, and they're constrained by cash. You know, it's all income constrained. And that was how Snap was formed. So 2012, we launched Snap as a business. We started knocking on doors and saying, hey, look what we did over here as a bunch of volunteers in Guildford at the rugby club, and we think we can do the same at your club. And we went out as a commission-only agency, you know, going out, burning shoe leather, knocking on doors, you know, going and pitching to brands and inviting them to sponsor clubs, as a couple of people who really had very little experience. But we had that success. You know, the brands came in, and, you know, we had a company called SI Capital that came in and sponsored both the rugby and the cricket club in the same town, and they took a couple of £1 million under management from the membership. The members benefited, they benefited. It was really well executed in terms of activations, and to this day, that sponsorship has continued to grow at the cricket club, and we're now 12 years later. That sponsor is still in post at the cricket club in the same town. So I think it just goes to show that with a bit of thought and kind of perseverance in terms of, well, how do we approach this and how do we deliver value to them? Any club can kind of start to go on that sponsorship journey. because I again repeat myself on this point that if you have an audience, you have a value, and that doesn't matter whether you're an individual athlete, team, club, league, or national governing body. If there is an audience that you can push a message out to, whether that be in conversation stood in the car park, or whether that's digitally, or whether that's in signage, whatever it is, you ultimately you have that value. And then after we'd done that and we started to roll out that consultancy, we very quickly outgrew ourselves. So we were being approached by people. We started putting stuff out on social media, and as wonderful as social media is, what it did was expose us to organizations that needed our help, that needed sponsorship, that were either very niche in their sport or were geographically miles away from where we were based. And because we were this commission-only agency that were only being paid a percentage of the sponsorship we brought in, it was very difficult to incur and increase our overheads. And that's where we kind of sat down and said, we had to say no to that first inquiry, which was geographically a long way away and in a sport and niche that we just hadn't had any experience in. And it really paid me to do it because the guy was absolutely awesome, super motivated, really wanted to learn, really wanted to kind of be part of the journey as well. And we said no. And we sat in the office and sort of scratched our heads and was like, why, how can we do this differently? What is it we can do to not be this boring consultancy that was just going out and doing the hard yards and creating proposals and things on paper? It was kind of the moment that I suppose Snap fundamentally pivoted, and we were like, this is all got to go digital. It was that era of, everything was starting to move that way anyway. We started to search around and absolutely no one was doing what we were doing. And that's not just in the UK. We couldn't find anything globally where we had this matchmaking service between brands and rights owner organizations. So rights owners being those that are seeking sponsorship. And those that, the very few that did exist were almost like poster sites. I'm a club and I need a set of shirts, and I could search like a Auto Trader style car search criteria and find them and maybe express an interest. But that didn't go anywhere near supporting what the clubs needed. And so we started to poke around with some of our existing customers and say, well, what is it that would really help you? If we weren't here, what would it be that you'd need to be able to either replicate what we've already done or sustain what we've already done and carry on doing it? And that's what formed our basic start point for snapsponsorship.com. And we built something out where we effectively got the old PDF document or sponsorship brochure that we used to create for a club, which showed the lovely pictures and the price and the benefits and the description of what the sponsorship package entailed. And we landed it into our website. And then it just evolved from there. That was the start point. And then we created the search functionality where brands and sponsors could go on and say, okay, show me a rowing club that's on the south coast of England, that's got more than 500 members, that's got less than 6 boats, or whatever it may be. And, you could really refine the criteria. And that was kind of phase one. And once we'd done that, we kind of said, right, there's something for you to get started with. And now tell us what's not working and what you've got gaps with. And now going back over the last 4 or 5 years since then, it's just exploded and evolved. And functionality and tools wise now, yes, we've still got the kind of brochure items, what we call assets and opportunities in the portfolio, which means that the club's got everything digitally rather than in a printed brochure. But now when the sponsor connects with them after they've searched and found them, they can actually have a negotiation within the system. The negotiation then lands into a contract, which is all bespoke with the items and the parties included in the agreement. Once they've done that, they can do social media scheduling. So we've built something the equivalent of Hootsuite within our platform, ground up. So all of the communications about that partnership for the entirety of the agreement are available to be promoted directly from within the system, stopping you having to pull imagery and hashtags and URLs. So all of that, and I mean, the functionality is huge in terms of breadth, but all of the things that we built have been driven on request. So club volunteers saying, this is what takes me loads of time. It would be great if I didn't have to do that. The amount of clubs I go into that have got, even today, boards around an entire pitch. Let's take football as an example. I've been into football clubs in the last month where they've had not a single board space around the perimeter of an entire first 11 pitch. And when I started to kind of interrogate sponsorship revenue, I was like, there's a lot of boards out there and there's very little revenue in the pot. And when you start to peel the layers off the onion, what I found out when you eventually got to the treasurer and said, well, let's talk about the money, what's in the account? And when we started to interrogate it, there was like 25% of the boards that weren't funded. And then when you peel back the next layer on the onion, like half of those 25% of the businesses had gone bust more than 5 years ago. They didn't even exist anymore. But no one had taken the board down. No one had recognised the fact that that money hadn't come in. So the first thing we did was just go back to all the sponsors that were still in existence that hadn't funded their board and said, hey, your board's still up. Did you want to pay your invoice? And they all just said, yeah, of course, we haven't got it. Send it over. And it's like, it's that sort of challenge that volunteers have. And when people move on and people don't know what the deal really entailed, there's no contract. You know, the void that we stepped into was just eradicating all of that. So the system becomes timeless. It's, you know, you've got an audit trail of every deal you've ever done. Heaven forbid someone passes away, moves on from the club. You know, there's a constant thread of commercials that sits within the platform. And then the next user picks it up. So when the board changes and you have your AGM and there's a re-election, somebody new steps into the void. They've got the complete picture of everything commercial that's ever happened at the club from a sponsorship perspective. And I think, you know, that has just been a massive safety blanket for a lot of clubs that join us. It's a case of we want to look professional. We want to push the club on the field. And to do that, we need to push the club on off the field and provide them with a platform and tools to do it. It's just been, been a game changer for our customers. So really pleased to have been able to fundamentally move the needle on that.
I think there's a really interesting point there around that safety blanket, because one of the biggest challenges going forwards in sport across the board is time poor volunteers. And actually, and I'm generalizing here, but a lot of sport is generally amateur and it's very inefficient in how things are done, purely because the vast majority, it's just the second or third thing that they do after being a parent, you know, having their day job, sometimes having second jobs, multiple kids doing multiple sports, and then the little volunteer role is actually, that's not their priority. And the ability to streamline that and make it as I guess like almost hand-holding as possible to say, look, if you come in, it's all there. It's not, you know, oh, I don't know how to do that. I've never done so. No, you don't need. It's all there. And one of the things that I really liked was the ability to learn from other clubs and other sports that are on the platform. So the success stories of what's worked, pulling on the coattails of it, instead of actually going, you've got to now start your club in Guildford or wherever it is from scratch. You're a rugby club, right? Well, let's find rugby club. What's worked with rugby clubs? And actually that learning is so powerful.
Yeah. Probably my favourite example of that is Worthing Rugby Club. The guy there, he's actually, I believe he's in a paid role commercially, but they joined the platform. And everyone joins the platform for different reasons. You know, we've got organisations that join us with £250,000 worth of sponsorship income per annum, and they don't actually have any aspirations to grow that number. What they want to do is make sure they look after what they've got. So they're purely using it for management tools, etc. But there are others that are there because they've either got no sponsors or they've got lots of sponsors that want more, and they are absolutely on the acquisition drive. And back to your point, the Worthing example, you know, is probably the best way of explaining the point you just made. And the guy there had signed up. He'd done exactly what we'd asked. I mean, it's like all these things. You can have the best system in the world. If people don't follow the instruction and don't use it, then of course it's never going to work. He was one of those people who just went, I'm here, tell me what to do. We built their profile. We onboarded him. He had an awesome go-to-market visual in terms of the finished platform. We did his internal launch, which is all about going out to club audiences and looking at existing stakeholder groups. And when we got to the external launch, which is right, how are we going to go and now target our first industry vertical? He selected that he wanted to go after a state agency. It was something they didn't have within their club. And exactly as you described, he didn't have to sit there and scratch his head and go, right, okay, estate agents, they sell houses, they rent houses. How do I approach them? What's the value proposition? He just goes into the library on the system. You know, there's a video to watch. There's all of the literature, the documentation, everything you could possibly need, and live examples of activations that have been done at clubs in rugby with an estate agency. He didn't quite follow the very last point. in the way we suggested he do it, but he took the case study of another rugby club that had engaged with an estate agent, and it detailed how it happened, what the activations were, the value it delivered to the estate agent, and then how the estate agent then put more money into the club as a result. He took that case study, he downloaded it, and he literally sent it to the info at email addresses for half a dozen local estate agents that were closest to the rugby club in Worthing. Blind copy them. He went out to all of them simultaneously and said, we are going to have an estate agency partner associated with the club. We'd love to have a conversation to see your level of interest. Please see attached. This is how it's going to work and the value you will get. And he closed the deal on the same day and had money in the bank within 72 hours. So, it's just, to your point, you don't have to be an expert. You don't have to have time. We've got people that use the system that don't necessarily have even a great level of IT literacy. We've got people that are out and out salespeople in their day job, and we've got people that have never sold a thing in their life, but they can just follow. It's very, very cookie cutter. We know you sign up, we go through these stages. Once you've done the internal launch, we go to the external launch. Pick your industry you want to go after first. There's probably 25 industry examples within the library, and we go after one after the other, and it's just replicate. And the great thing about it is it's a well-known thing within the system, within the client base that we have. So people actively feed back in the successes they have. If we can test it and prove it can be replicated, it makes it into the library. So there is a rowing club on the South Coast and a rugby club in Scotland and a football club in the Midlands. The exact same methodology can be applied to all of them, and it's there to just pick up and do. You don't have to have any knowledge of sponsorship or how to go to market or how to pitch and portray yourself. It's literally pick up and play, and share that knowledge back within the network. And it's what's really nice, and what I've, I suppose, enjoyed seeing unfold over the last few years is that network and that internal communication that we've got amongst our customers isn't now restricted to sponsorship. So we've got platforms where all of our users can talk to one another and help each other out as well. So it's everything from kit purchases to website decisions to how they're managing kind of club authentication and some of the approvals. Like you can get FA Charters standard and all of those club mark awards and things. People are helping each other out on all things to do with running, forming, sadly closing down clubs. People are helping each other out on all of the challenges that volunteers face on a daily, weekly, monthly basis, running their clubs. And I never envisaged that being something that Snap would ever facilitate. But by creating this community, this sort of following we have, these volunteers are helping each other out on a whole range of different issues that go way deeper and way beyond kind of the commercial sponsorship that we set out to be.
Okay, so I'm going to put on my club hat. I'm a member of 3 volunteer-run clubs, but I've come in. I've got no experience of this at all. I've decided that I want to try and get some sponsorship for the club. Just talk us through, in layman's terms, the actual process in terms of, I've sent you an email. Hi, I'm interested. We'll obviously make sure in the notes below this video we've got all of the links to what you're up to. But take us through in the simplest terms. What does that look like, that journey?
So if someone's interested and they've decided that they need to go on that sponsorship journey and they want to put some strategy behind it, there's a demo on our website which kind of first off shows them everything, so they get a bit of a flavour of what I'm just about to say to you. And it's a really nice way to kind of be gently inducted. It's not some sort of heavy sales spiel. It's just, here is what the system does and this is how it works for other clubs. If it's something you think might be useful, then this is how you sign up. The sign up process is 2 minutes. You go on, you sign up. It needs your name, your club name, your email address. You set a password. The second screen is a direct debit mandate. It's a sort code. It's an account number, all very standard stuff. That's all managed by a third party direct debit financial regulated organization. At that point, you have a profile. It gives you a login, and you get a welcome email which says, hey, here's your account, this is your username, log in, set up your 2-factor authentication. At that point, you kind of stop that's you paused for probably 7 to 10 days. You'll get an email from an account manager that will welcome you. It's a real human being. They say hi straight away, same day that you signed up. And they'll be like, I'm going to be your account manager. I'm going to support you through this launch process. Nothing for you to do for 7 to 10 days. We're going to go away and build your profile. And my onboarding team here will step into the breach. They will look and trawl the internet to find out everything about your club. That'd be websites, social media channels, anything else in press and media. And typically we can build your sponsorship profile to a sort of 90 to 95% complete state without any input from yourselves. At the point at which they've exhausted what they can find out, they then engage with the club volunteer or whoever it is that signed up and say, hey, look, this is what we've built. What's your thoughts? What other information have you got that you can share with us? We'll take any documentation that already exists around sponsorship packages and existing sponsors. We'll take any spreadsheets of existing deals that you have. We'll load all that into the system so you're not only got something which looks forward, but also looks historically at your sponsorship that you currently have. All of this happens within that first 7 to 10 day period. So at that point, when you're happy that the sponsorship profile well represents your club, it gets handed back to the account manager. The account manager then engages and looks at all of your assets and opportunities. So we're a cricket club. We've got sight screens. We've got wicket covers. We've got boundary markers. Whatever it may be, whatever sport it is, we'll make sure that we've got all of those things loaded so we have effectively a stocked shop. Everything is there available to be engaged with and potentially purchased. And at that point, we then go through our launch process. So we publish the profile at this point. It then becomes visible to the outside world, and we embark on our internal launch. The internal launch is all about actually how do we engage our existing stakeholder groups? So that's our existing sponsors, because actually when we start saying, hey, we're now using a system called Snap, and we send an invite to our existing sponsor and say, you can log into our platform here and see our existing deal, but also check out what else we've got available. What we see is existing sponsors end up coming in and spending more. Inquisitive, didn't know that, I didn't realize that thing was available. I didn't know that I could have extended my relationship and so on and so forth. The second is our members, because how many club volunteers that all of a sudden find themselves in that sponsorship role happen to be parent guardian of little Johnny or Jane in the under 10s? Well, it's very unlikely that little Johnny or Jane's mum, dad, guardian in the under 10s knows every other parent or guardian of every child in every age group from micros through to veterans. And therefore, it's highly unlikely that we've ever truly tapped our existing audience. So our internal launch then goes on to look at how do we communicate what we have available for sponsorship to our existing membership. And we've all got one of these things kicking around in our pocket these days. So we can go on our phone, and whether we're receiving it on a WhatsApp message, via a Facebook group, via the club newsletter, social media, whatever it is, all of a sudden our entire sponsorship portfolio is at the end of a URL, because it's all now web-based. So we can push out to all of our members, hey, check out our new profile on Snap. And you can be scrolling. I can be the under 19s head coach, and I'm scrolling through and realize that there is an opportunity, whether it be personally or through my company, to sponsor and get involved. And once we've exhausted all of our internal avenues, we then take the club through the external launch process. And the reason we do it in this order is, and sadly we've seen it all too often, where clubs get excited, they go out to market, they attack that estate agent, they go and secure someone from the local community. It's the Winkworth or the Knight Frank or the Seymours down on the high street. But what they failed to realise was that absolute stalwart at the club, who's the person that's always the last out the car park, he's clearing up the pitch side mess that's been left, bottles and tape or whatever it may be, has run the local franchise of another estate agent, Kershaw's, for the last 25 years. And all of a sudden we're going to go and plaster his kid's kit in one of his biggest competitors' brands. And needless to say, it's not going to go down too well. So we always do it in that way, and we do it in that order. We give all the membership the opportunity first to step into the breach and potentially become a sponsor. And then once we've exhausted those avenues, we then go to market externally. We start to look at, right, which industry are we going to target first? What do we currently not have? And then that's where we go back and we look to the library, and we approach those brands based on well-trodden path, pre-written, pre-case studied from other people in the network. So, and in terms of timescale, short of that, that first initial build is that 7 to 10 day turnaround period. We've then got clubs like Phoenix Youth Football Club, who went live and literally woke up the next morning, 24 hours later, with an inbound inquiry from someone they've never heard of that just happened to search and find them on the platform, offered to sponsor, and the money was in the bank within a week. And then you've got the other extremes where we've got clubs that have gone through and really driven that outbound engagement process and gone out and secured sponsors from the outside market. And I think probably one of my favourite examples of that is Woodham Mortimer Cricket Club, tiny club based in Essex. They had one team, played Sunday League cricket. They joined us with no sponsors at all. They actually joined us through one of our partnerships. So we're actually partnered with Essex Cricket, and it's been quite a big part of our go-to-market strategy in a way that we've been able to keep the cost down the way we have for access to the platform, which has always been our ambition, because we want to make sure it's something that everyone can use, whether it's a really informal single team organization or whether it's a massive, micros through to veterans, 5 teams in every age group type massive club. And we've got that price point, I believe, at a place where everyone can engage. But to do that, we can't put a massive team of people on the ground going out and meeting these clubs. So we've been quite reliant on our partner network. So we've built that up. We're partnered with where we first met. I remember, Kevin, we met at obviously Hertz Sports Partnership through the Active Partnership Network. A few years ago now. We built on that relationship with Hertz, and then obviously we're now partnered with Active Partnerships nationally, so all the regional offices. We're partnered with just over 60% of all of the county FAs in the country. 16 county cricket boards, England Golf, England Boxing, GB Archery, British Wrestling, the list goes on. And they're proactively promoting us to their clubs as a source of support for generating that additional income through sponsorship. And Woodham Mortimer Cricket Club came from one of those partnerships at Essex Cricket. A guy there called Graham Pryke, and he was really proactive in just saying to all of the clubs in Essex, hey, look, come along, listen to these guys. We ran a webinar. And Woodham Mortimer stepped up straight away and said, look, we're going to do it. This guy, a guy called George Verlander, had stepped in as the vice chairman of the club. He'd been appointed to the role at their AGM. He'd been at the club for 10 years, and to his knowledge, they'd never had a single sponsor. And they'd sent out hundreds of letters. They'd done all the things that people historically used to do, create sponsorship brochures, all of that good stuff, but had zero success. They joined Snap with the ambition of covering their match ball costs. They wanted about 500 quid. They'd done 2,500 in the first 3 weeks. They've now gone on. They've just completed their second season on the platform. They just closed their 50th 5-0 sponsorship deal. So from a standing start, they've gone from 0 to 50 sponsors in 2 seasons. And I think probably, the most pleasing thing is not the pure number, but actually what it's impacted and what it's enabled them to do. So a club that only had one team, that didn't have a scoreboard, that didn't have any away kits. All of a sudden, they've got a coloured aways kit, they've got new wicket covers, they've got digital scoreboard, they've fixed the fence at the front of the ground, which has been, broken and down for the last, I don't know how many years. The negative, I suppose, to it, the guy George, who initially signed up, now struggles to get himself into the second team. And we joke about it quite often, but he went from being a regular starter in the ones, and I call it the ones, but they only had one team, so it was by definition it's the only team he could be in. But the growth of the club as a result of them being more proactive, more visible on social media, by having a better ground and more facilities and away colours kit, it started to attract players. They're now running 3 sides. The club has grown. They're now talking about and aspiring to start a Dynamos, a youth program at the cricket club, and then eventually a ladies' side. And it's just been a revelation for them. And it makes me incredibly proud to see not necessarily the pure number of sponsors and the value of the income that they've generated, but what's the impact it has and how is it being applied in the club setting to actually deliver change. And that change has meant that, that club's grown. It's given more people the opportunity to participate. And that for me is, that's the win. That's the big win.
Yeah, I think a lot of places fear often in inverted commas, a more professional aspect, because they think they'll lose some of what makes the club so family friendly and open and trying to bring in more people. And it's the opposite. It actually allows you to do more of it. So no, that's a fantastic set of stories there. And I think it's, as I say, I've kind of followed what you guys have done for a few years now, and seeing it across a range of sports, I think that's, and again, a really interesting aspect to me. So I think there's some really good stuff. And as I said, we'll make sure we link all of that in the show notes. There's one more question I want to know in terms of your personal journey along all of this, trying to navigate this. How do you balance the personal aspect and the professional aspect, in the sense of the fact this was founded from your passionate amateur love of your local club and supporting your local club, but obviously this is now, you're driving this and growing this, and it has to be sustainable. And how do you balance those two things? Because there are so many people out there who, myself included, would give every minute they could for free to their local clubs to help. But ultimately, you've got to make sure that, for the sake of the thousands of clubs using this, that actually it is successful long term. So how do you balance those two things?
Yeah, I think it's tough. I don't think there's no getting away from anyone that's sort of started on and embarked on a journey like this, whether it be driven by passion or pure commercial mindset. I think aside, I've stumbled across this problem by virtue of seeing my own club and caring about my own club, and seeing that there needed to be another way to generate more income. And through having the passion for my club and seeing the gap. When I talk about having the passion for my club, I mean, I started there as a mini. I was the kid that was the ball boy for the first team on the Saturday. I love that club, and to see us, rebuild the clubhouse was an incredibly proud moment. And, it was something that I was kind of sad to see the old club go, because I had so many fond memories there, but also just acknowledge the fact we needed to move on, and what we built was awesome. But I was genuinely worried. I was worried about the fact that, as a membership of a circa 1,000 people, we all of a sudden had £500,000 worth of debt. And that's a big number. And when your commercial strategy is, based on that kind of philanthropy and donation based approach, and then we're reliant on membership bar revenue like lots of other clubs, it's quite a scary prospect. And now we weren't exposed because we had very, very clever people running the board, and they had it underwritten and it was protected, and, we were never at risk. But fundamentally, we wanted to pay that debt down. And I think that kind of emotion that generated inside me, and the passion I had to try and support the club, is what just made me think and look differently at it. And then creating sustainability was about, how do we make this something that, when I'm not involved at the club doing it anymore, how can we make sure that there is a methodology, some guardrails, some tools, some support, which means that whoever steps into that role moving forward can continue to do it. And I think creating sustainability has been really about making sure that what we do is driven by the people that use it, and not driven by our ideology from sitting in an office thinking this is what we think is great. And I think, right at the very top of every single user on the Snap Systems dashboard is a feedback module. And you've got the classic red sad face, amber on the fence, and the green smiley face. And you click it and you can write what you like. And that's where all of our development has been driven from. What is it that you're struggling with, that you need help with, that's frustrating you, that you don't have time for, that it would be good if there was a tool or a guide or something to support you? And therefore, for me, that, to answer your question, is that's what's going to drive our sustainability, is our users, because they're the people that keep telling us what it is that's changing in their world, what they're seeing at the coalface day in, day out. And that's what will create sustainability, because as long as we keep reacting to that feedback, and we keep tweaking and improving the tools that we provide them with, and the guidance and the support and the network, that will mean that regardless of the experience they have, regardless of the volume of money they need to raise, what they're trying to raise it for, providing that we keep supporting them and listening, I don't believe that there is a negative in any way in the future for the sponsor, for the club, or for Snap as the platform, because fundamentally those three components can all coexist in a genuine win-win-win environment. Yes, we get the revenue from clubs registering on the system. Brands get the opportunity to get closer to the audiences to generate that know, like, and trust association, which they crave because ultimately they want to sell you their products and services. And as a user, as a club and the membership from within that club, they're getting value through being exposed to and given the opportunity to see these brands that provide them with the experiences and the products and services that they may wish to purchase. But that ecosystem, that flow of money and that flow of opportunity means that there is no losers. So, providing that we all go into it with open eyes and with the right intentions, then there is no downside. And I think one of the key parts around the education that we push within the platform is we're not going with an open palm trying to get as much money as we can from a sponsor on day one. We proactively talk to our clubs about, let's go and understand what it is the brand wants. Let's take a sum of money which reasonably means that we can execute this and makes everyone feel comfortable that we're going to go on this journey in a partnership and make sure we deliver value, and then agree an upside. So when we have success, this is the journey we're plotting. We want to get from A to B. It's unlikely to be a direct line. We're going to have to probably deviate and work some things out along the way. But when we land this, when we deliver this value, recognize it. So when we deliver those MOTs to the MOT garage, make sure there's some sort of mechanism to rebate a percentage back to the club so that what might have started as a couple of £1,000 sponsorship deal or a couple of £100 sponsorship deal can ultimately end the season with maybe a slightly more significant number in the pot. And again, just to try and give some flavour to that, because I appreciate some people will be listening on audio only, so I can't kind of show it to you visually. But if I use the example of the estate agent, we created, and I talked earlier on about the duration of some of the sponsors and how long they've been in some of the clubs that we work with. The estate agency example is probably one of my favourites. We did an old school style checkbook. So like this is going back 10 years, but the methodology still happens today in our clubs. So 10 years ago, we were kind of scratching our heads and saying, well, how do we get people engaged with an estate agent? Because let's be honest, it's not the most exciting thing. And it was like, well, how do we land that into a club and make the audience interested? And we printed these old school style checkbooks with a perforated edge with a tear out. And we gave the checkbook to every age group manager in this cricket club. And the sponsor sponsored the wicket covers. So they had a really nice brand presence right in the middle of the ground. And when they weren't protecting the wicket, they were pushed to the side of the ground, which was adjacent to a main road. So they got some quite nice visual exposure. But they were interested in getting more people walking through the door and selling their house using their services. And what we did is we gave every age group manager this checkbook. And what it said on the check was essentially that if this check was presented to the estate agent, they would match or beat any fee rate offered by any other high street estate agent. So straight away, we think about that in a purest sense. As a member at the club, I've got to win, because if I need to sell my house, these guys are going to sell it for me and they're going to better the fee that I'm going to have to pay, the cost that it's going to cost me to do that. And the estate agent all of a sudden has got tangibility, because it's like if they were just going about their normal day and trading their business, did that come from the wicket covers I've got at the cricket club or did it not? And no one's ever going to really know. So all of a sudden we had tangibility. So that estate agent could say that piece of spend that I did in my marketing budget for those wicket covers, that sponsorship has delivered me a direct, tangible benefit. And then what we did was, on presentation of that check, not only did the end consumer get a discount on the fee, but the estate agent then paid a commission back into the club on the successful completion of the sale. The club then were smart enough to agree to give 50% of that commission to the age group where the check originated. Now, what have we got in our audience of age group managers? We've got competitive people that historically have probably played sport and are standing in the bar on a Saturday afternoon or a Sunday afternoon with their little Johnny and Jane. The kids are running around. The mums and dads are all having a conversation. And we put a Blue Peter style thermometer in the clubhouse, which showed how many checks each age group had managed to get away and get used. So you've got the under sevens that got two that stood there ribbing the under eights coaches that say, you've only got one. And we created that internal competition within the club. Anyway, net result of all of this, the end user, and it didn't matter whether it was a club member, someone at work, someone you happened to hear talking at the bus stop about moving house, it didn't matter who you gave the check to. It was like, here is the check, go and give that to the estate agent and you get a decent deal. So it was a win for them. There was a win for the estate agent. There was a win for the club. Financially, the sponsor, the estate agent in question, paid £5,000 to be on those wicket covers. At the end of the first season, £22,500 had been paid to the club. Now, if we had gone out on day one and approached any sponsor, let's go stick with the estate agent, and said it's £22,500 for the wicket covers, it would have been a very, very short conversation, and the door would have probably hit us on the backside on the way out. But £5,000 was a really palatable number. But because we could track the referred business via the checkbook scheme, because we had age group managers who were motivated to get those checks out the door because they knew they were getting half of the revenue that came in from the commission, and because we created that competition with the thermometer scheme in the bar, it was self-fulfilling. All we had to do was print the checkbooks and distribute them to the age group managers, and the rest took care of itself. And £5,000 up front originally resulted in £22,500 into the club coffers. And that relationship, I think, lasted more than 5 years at that club. So delivering a similar number year on year. That methodology sits within our library, and we've got clubs up and down the country doing exactly the same thing today. And that's something that 10 years ago.
I love that story, and I think it's a really nice way to pull it all together, because I think, we talk a lot about processes and platforms and professionalism versus amateurism, and sometimes the concept can get a little bit lost. But by that story there, it is exactly clear for rugby, say any sport out there, to be able to go, I understand now. And that's where I think moving forwards, I remember someone saying this to me about wireless technology, contactless technology in terms of the last few years in the pandemic. And it jumped on 5 to 10 years from what they'd forecast. So do you remember when we went to the new £1 coins and all of the vending machines had to be changed? And within a year of some of those upgrades, they were all having to then be redone for contactless. And they said the contactless concept has always existed. It's the ability to access it that is been the biggest barrier holding back businesses and or other organizations that use it. As a tool, what you have done is turn that tool into something that volunteers who are time poor and perhaps not computer literate can use cleanly, simply, and if they need to, pass it on to the next person cleanly and simply. And that is something that I really love finding these stories, because I think too often we can get lost in some of the real details, but at its headline, what you've done is turn something that can be really, really complicated and make it accessible. So I think that's a kind of a really nice way to pull it all together. And I don't know, just mindful of, obviously we're into Olympic year now, and obviously everyone gets excited about sport from kind of Joe Public through to the top level athletes. What would be your kind of takeaway message and what you're looking for out of the next, say, 12 months in what's going to be a very sporty year for the whole of the nation?
Yeah, I think good question. I think for me, it's like sort of framing it slightly differently is people often say to me, how should clubs start and where, when should they start? And my thing is just start. That's the key message, is do it yesterday. That's the right time. People often say, we'll do that at the start of the season, but that's often too late. On a really practical term, it's a really boring example, but if you want to order a kit, it's too late to start thinking about the sponsors when you're thinking about needing to order. Because the sponsors and the logos and everything needs to be in place and contracted before you can go to print. And if I had £1 for every time that someone said to me, "This is fantastic. I wish I'd done this before. I wish we did it last year," it would be a phenomenal pot of money. It's kind of that behaviour within clubs is one of nervousness, is one of apprehension. And I fully respect that, because we're spending valuable pounds to embark on journeys to use systems like Snap. But what I try and say to clubs is you're not alone. It's very valid to have those concerns, but look at the landscape we live in. Funding is not coming down from central government, from national governing bodies in the way that it used to. We have to be more proactive. We have to innovate within our clubs to generate more revenue, to become more sustainable. Sponsorship is just one of those income pillars that clubs need to have, but it's one which I think above all other pillars, it's probably most underutilized. And if we can just turn that dial by 10, 15, 20% at a club, it makes a fundamental difference. So for me, I think the big takeaway message that we all need to prepare for is in Olympic years, or as we see in World Cup years for individual sports, we typically see influx of players. We see uplift in participation, which is obviously fantastic, and it's what drives lots of us to do what we do. But with all of that increased participation, that increase in interest in our sport, it comes at a cost. And the last thing we ever want to be doing, and rugby saw it massively in 2003 when they won the World Cup. Clubs struggled. We were creaking at the seams to be able to accommodate the influx of players that wanted to participate. And that should never be the case. We need to make sure that we create a model whereby we can be sustainable as clubs. So, obviously I've got a commercial bias and an interest in Snap, but I'm genuinely passionate about sport succeeding and people having access to the opportunities that I have, because sport played such a massive role in shaping my life and my enjoyment growing up as a young boy. And I think, to be able to play a part in those clubs' journeys through that sustainability, through income and sponsorship, is something which I'm incredibly passionate, incredibly proud of. And, I think for me, if you are volunteering in a club, and revenue and cash flow is on the agenda, then, I would love Snap to be part of that journey and to be able to support people. And, don't be concerned about the income. The income will arrive. Typically clubs are covering their year one costs on Snap within the first 8 weeks of going live. So then everything that you secure 8 weeks onwards is upside. I think just get started, and you don't have to use Snap. I'm not sitting here pushing Snap to the nth degree. If you want to get out there and think about some of the things we said today on the podcast, you can go and apply some of that logic, just by getting out and walking out and knocking on the door of the local MOT garage or the local estate agent. And you can do some of that stuff on your own. You don't have to have Snap to do it. It'll make your life a lot easier. It'll make you be able to do it quicker and generate a greater value. And you will retain those sponsors longer. And our stats show us that. But whatever you do, with or without Snap, just start today, because that income, if you don't need it now, you'll need it tomorrow. So to just crack on. If we can help, we'd love to.
Brilliant. Well, as I've said, we'll make sure we include all the notes, everything you're up to, and make sure if people have got any more questions or they're keen to find out more, they can get in touch. But Mark, thank you so much. It's a really cool way for us to kick off the year. I know there is a huge amount of excitement around sport this year, but equally there's a lot of concern as the pressures from the last few years start to mount up financially. So I do think it's a really good time to be sharing this. And just really grateful for you sharing some time with us and obviously all the great work that you're doing. So thank you so much. Thank you again to Mark for joining me for today's interview. You can connect with both Mark and Snap via the links in the show notes. I really hope you've taken something from our interview today, and if you have, please make sure you comment on the episode so we can hear the feedback, because it's really appreciated as we look forward to future shows. If you haven't already, make sure you hit subscribe however you're joining us, and thank you so much again for being part of the Road Monkey community. Hopefully you can join us for another episode very soon.